Hey, everybody, welcome Branden to our second jazz session. It's really good to have you here.
Be here.
Yeah, we've been really enjoying your work on YouTube. In Sync, you had a really nice reflection about it this morning.
Yeah. Actually, what I said to Alexander was, it's probably one of the best typologies I've ever seen.
Really?
No, really, no.
Well, yeah, it's gone through many years of development, and yeah, it's still technically ongoing, even though it's kind of stopped lately. But yeah, it's definitely changed. It's last year? I think that was released last year. I think so.
Shame.
Yeah, it has changed slightly, ever so slightly. It's gotten a little bit more refined, I think, since then. But yeah, it's always an ever-changing project of mine. Like all of the videos that I have on my YouTube channel are technically just extensions of that very typology. Yeah.
You start with this definition of psychology, which I really liked, and psyche as animating spirit of the body. Yeah, it's a cool idea. Yeah, can you tell me more about has that changed? Is that still the same?
I still think that's the same. That psychology is the study of life, and I take that very seriously. The study of all things that are moving and animating. Yep, I think that's the same.
Yeah, cool. And sorry, NSYNC.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think the actual terminology he appeals to in the video is the unseen animating principle.
Yeah, that is also part of that insane animated. I think that is the definition of life, or at least the one that I laid out there. Yeah.
Is that a
psyche?
Is that
I think it was psyche.
I think it was psyche. Yeah.
Psyche, yeah. And the psyche, is that part of your career? Are you a psychologist?
No, I am primarily just an artist.
Cool.
I just have a deep interest in a lot of these topics.
And psychology in particular?
Yeah, that's always kind of been a curiosity to me, noticing how people are different and why they are different, or at least trying to describe these differences as best as possible. That's always been deeply interesting to me.
After having a look at the video, I'm curious, what brought you to the TOE community exactly?
I think I found my way there. Let's see, to trace it back, I think I was working on Metaforma, which is a book that I've made. I'm not sure if you were aware of it, but it's yeah, I was working on that. I was more or less just trying to come to terms with what ontology was, because I was still very new to philosophy in that sense. I joined a couple of communities. It was a few months after starting the project that I joined the Theories of Everything server, and then that is when I ran into James. I stumbled upon his blog, and I noticed that the cover of the book that he was working on was almost identical to Metaforma's cover, and that was a very curious synchronous event. So I just decided to reach out to him, and sure enough, we started chatting. So yep, and that's how I ended up in Theories of Nothing.
Cool, yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about Metaforma?
Yeah, it's an even more kind of outdated. It's like the video that you watched, that was the refined version of Metaforma. At the end of it all there, I think
the video
it was
is called A-Forma.
Yeah, it's called A-Forma.
And the same thing, or?
Oh, what was that?
Is it the same thing?
It is the same thing. With A-Forma, I primarily focused on the typology part of it. Metaforma did a lot of build up to get to the typology, and I thought that I think looking back on it, if I were to redo it, I would focus primarily on the typology. Yeah, because that's mostly what I had to say about it, and that's how I think most things are constructed, through a typology. Yep.
Yeah, I was. That was one of the first questions on my little piece of paper here. Actually, is how you would characterize the system you've made. Like, is it a metaphysical system, ontological system, or is it primarily a psychological system?
All of the above. I think it's, when I started it off, it didn't have, I guess it has to be all three of them, because I tried to bundle everything up into at least one primary thing, and I tend to not, or at least I try to avoid too many separations beyond its own typology. The typology itself tends to be pretty segmented, but again, that has since changed about a year since then. Yeah.
Okay, and if you had to, I guess, because I feel like the video didn't get too much into like the metaphysics part of it. Could you give us like a brief overview of that?
To sort of transport myself back, I think the metaphysics of it was maybe the second or third video. That was the part about assumption, and that was how I figured that everything was, in a sense, created. Everything just sort of was gathered up into a bundle, and then something of the sort happened. It's been a while, of course, but yes. Do you want me to go over what I think it is now, or?
Yeah, I'm curious about how things have changed for you, for sure.
Yeah. So usually when it comes to a sort of metaphysical approach to how things are made, I see it as now at least, I see it as, obviously you have to, it's common to start off with the concept of nothing, and it makes sense to do so. And of course, that's how you, in theory, get something. But to me now, it's something of a, I try to see the world in a somewhat materialistic sense. It's like, how do you start off a material world? You just sort of have this perfectly smooth continuum, and then things become more textured as time goes on, and those textures, or rather bits of the texture, start gathering and accreting together. And that tends to be how I see it now. But to maybe get a little bit more metaphysical, I kind of borrow the concept of God and the idea that if everything starts off as a smooth continuum and everything just sort of becomes textured, or at least that's how we can conceive a sort of causal relationship from nothing to something, it is, God sort of descending down into the world to create texture and to create the forms that ultimately become life in that sense. So, yeah, I think that's the best way that I could describe it at the moment.
No, it's cool. So yeah, the smooth continuum definitely reminds. It sounds like a substance of some kind, but without any kind of form. And I guess nothing, in not the absolute sense of nothing, because I guess that wouldn't make sense to. Like God would be out of the picture at that point.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a substance. There would be no,
Yeah.
Continuum, I think, presupposes the definition of a substance.
Yeah.
But perhaps nothing in the sense of no physicality, no space-time, no forms of that kind, particularity.
Yeah, it is. The
like no thingness.
Yeah, no thingness, exactly. Yeah, I tend to still keep. I don't think it was too present in Aforma or the video presentations there, but prior to that, it was a very mathematical-esque sort of construction of how things were made, and now it's kind of sort of gone back a little bit, but not that much. It's the way the way that I imagine the smooth continuum of sorts is like the base of a triangle, and the utmost texture of it all is just the point of the triangle, like starting from the bottom and then going upwards. But with how I imagine it now, that triangles kind of upside down to kind of convey the sense of descent into texture in that sense. Yeah.
How does that? How do you differentiate the descent versus the ascent as a obviously in the imagery it makes sense, but I'm curious about the description.
I just, when it comes to making concepts like this, I try to hunt down words that feel at least good to say and have some sort of context to the imagery that I make. And descent is, it kind of comes from the concept of like just sort of in a way being in flight, and that's how I describe this the ascent, if you will, to go into flight, to move away from the world and to become ultimately smooth and flat again. And I kind of attribute flight to the concept of fear as well. The threads down that road I don't have a strong concept of anymore, or at least they're a little shaky now. But yeah, God sort of entering and leaving the world makes some degree of sense to me, and especially in regards to like a worldly phenomenon too, or at least humanitarian issues in that sense. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think.
I was just going to say, out of curiosity, like when you're talking about God, I can understand the idea of, I guess, God being that, like, ultimate one-dimensional, thing that's smooth and differentiated. But what do you conceive of, like, for instance, I guess, what would God's reason be for descending, in your mind?
Yeah, that is the thing. It's quite curious. I don't see God as something that has a consciousness until it descends, and I think descent is something of a necessary phenomenon. I feel like that's kind of skirting around the issue a little bit, but I don't know. I think it's just something that sort of just happens. But it's like if for example, if he just wasn't in flight, if he was always in descent, then the same thing would happen. Why would he go into flight? Or if he was in the middle, why would he go toward one extreme or the other? Who can say? It's like the world necessarily has to have some sort of differentiation in it, and if it didn't have that, then there wouldn't be much of a world, even if you were to be on one extreme of flight or in descent. It's like it's a causal sort of way of trying to come to terms with that the world is here. You're trying to create a story out of it. Yeah.
No, I mean, that makes sense to me. I guess I would just wonder, at the point where you're sort of describing it as not being automatic in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Like there's choice. I would wonder at the identification with God at that point. It seems like you're talking about some fundamental substance, some non-contingent ground, or maybe ground in that sense isn't the correct metaphor because it's, up here.
Yeah.
But I guess I would wonder what impels you to identify it with God exactly.
I think it would just be that the concept of identity itself. It's a very curious thing. It seems like it hinges greatly on the need for differentiation to be something that is in the world. And if something is in the world, then it has to, it is in a sense identifiable, at least with perceptive organs and all of that. But it's identity. The concept of identity and agency to me seem intertwined in a way that I can't quite describe right now. I might have to do more thinking on it, but I think the key thing here is the concept of agency. Yeah,
It almost seems though that you're not attributing agency to that one-dimensional, right? Because you're saying that it necessarily descends. That doesn't seem like agency. Agency is the capacity to do or not to do, right?
True. Yeah. I mean, in that sense, then, yeah, if it can decide, if that one-dimensional necessary part can decide, which in my head doesn't make much decision, requires something of a body, but then again, I still do think that even if it is perfectly smooth, that it still is a body on account of it, still existing as a continuum. It's still in a way a thing. and that is the great mystery. I think it's like, how would a smooth continuum have an agency, a desire to be in a particular way, you know?
One of the ways I like to think about the smoothness versus texturedness, as you put it, is that there are these cycles, and at the end of the cycle, there's like the culmination of the ultimate texture, and that texture is kind of like there's nowhere left to go other than back to perfectly smooth again. So it's kind of like it's necessary in that it's like a cycle of smoothness to textureness back to smoothness again.
The
Does that fit
eternal
for you?
inverted triangle.
Yeah. I kind of like if God's like into smooth jazz, then it's kind of fitting. Sometimes it's textured and sometimes it's smooth.
Ooh.
Yeah. And does that image kind of capture? Yeah, I'm curious how that led to your kind of typing system in some way.
The typing system kind of evolved organically. I used to be into a lot of other typing systems, and I when I got into them, I was kind of obsessive with them, and I tried to digest the theory of them, and I very quickly hit the bottom of them, and I wanted there to be more, so I just made more. And I also saw that there were limits to them because even as I guess 10 years back at this point, yeah, I had this idea that things could still, that you could have a theory kind of encompass many different things. And if it was just talking about typology of people, then I was like, well, it could probably lead into other things too, because I can see the threads of it leading into other fields as well. So you might as well just make a typology of many things, of the world at least. Yeah.
And I really appreciate typology systems, or any system which tries to capture both that metaphysical ground in some way. Like it becomes this fractal in some sense, like the typology reflects what is happening in some fundamental level.
I'm curious, which of the elements of the typology would you say are like the crossover point with ontology or metaphysics?
What's this? It would be I think you may have noticed that each of them were color coded. I think those in themselves are the elements that lead into metaphysics and ontology and the like. There are 3 distinct colors, and each of them sort of relate to maybe linguistic objects that I've noticed while studying philosophy. And I think it was body that kind of related to being or isness, or a thing being a particular thing in general, just a distinct fact. I think it was called act at that time. Act is the yellow part. That's the maybe syntax, the order and structure of a sentence, and bond is the overarching context of that sentence. That's kind of how I saw it, and leading it into other domains and fields, maybe. With metaphysics, I think a lot of metaphysics is primarily linguistics, and if you focus on metaphysics through that vein, it's I think I lost my train of thought, but that is, I think those are the bones of it. Comments, thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate that we're asking questions about a system that it sounds like you've maybe not been, it has changed in some way, and that there's a year has passed since you've, like a year, maybe years passed since it's been like fully present in your mind in the way that it was back in 2023.
So what is ACT now? You said it used to be called ACT.
Yeah, I think it became AIM, and I think that's kind of similar to what was before it was ACT. What was it before ACT? I think it was just called Logic or Logical. Yeah. I think that was it. But yeah, it's called AIM currently. I've considered calling it ACT again, but these things are always changing. Theories are always changing, or at least they should be.
Yep. Is it a kind of telos then?
ACT as telos.
Well,
Yeah,
AIM brings to
AIM,
mind
Well,
telos.
yeah, definitely, yeah. It's telos in a sense. Yep.
Cool. Well, it fits well with the channel name. But our I don't know if you can see it on this platform, but our new YouTube channel name is Telos Ontos Eidos. I'm kind of curious if those words somehow fit your three categories as well. Maybe.
I'm also curious about that.
Tell us, perhaps. I don't know what the other ones are.
Ontos is like the existence of things.
Yeah. And
It's where ontology comes.
Eidos.
Eidos is like ideas, forms, schemata.
Yep, that fits pretty much almost exactly. Yeah.
High five to that.
Yeah.
Coincidence.
So just for the audience, like which would you pair the ontos and eidos up with? If telos is act or aim, which is
Then body would be ontos and eidos would be bond. Yeah.
That's what I figured. That's actually I'd already written that down actually.
Excellent.
Yeah. What led you to come up with the tripartite structure exactly?
To go back to the original bones of the typology, I think I started off with space, time, and void, and I think I called void flux interchangeably. Space was body, time was I guess aim, and void was bond. It started off in a scientific approach. Well, not a scientific approach per se, but just poking at these scientific terms, if you will, and mapping them onto different things that I've noticed about humans and what they are, I guess, made of or what they move through. I guess I was always thinking about substances and continuums in that sense. But as for where the idea came from, I'm not entirely sure. I guess I just wanted something to balance out space and time, and it made sense to use void, which at the time was kind of a stand-in for what spirit or soul was.
Because as you said, you were coming from a materialist perspective, so sort of like a soul or a spirit was too much assumption, or is that like how did you manage to fit void in without assumptions?
I'm curious as to what like impelled you to go towards void as a title for that. That seems and I guess how would you distinguish void and space? Because space on the face of it seems like seems quite similar to void in the sense that it's empty and things can go there.
Yeah. It's when did I come up with that one? I think I was in my early 20s, maybe 2021 or 20 or 21. It was space at the time. It still had that red color scheme to it, and I associated space with material bodies. It's like I focus more so on planets
like
for space. For like
extension?
Like dimension, yeah, similar to a dimension, exactly, yeah. Like I was thinking 3-dimension in that sense for space, like a measurement, if you will, maybe. But
yeah, I actually said extension. That's
extension.
Yeah, that's what Descartes called it, extension.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, it's similar.
As opposed to like void would be non-extension, then I guess.
Yeah. Maybe. I think so.
That's fair enough. That's what I'd put it at.
I'm
void.
definitely curious about that. Like, why void? What makes that,
Because I was rather young when I came up with it. I was looking for words. I didn't quite have the breadth of different words that I can use now. As simple as as the words that I use now. Yeah, I aim toward really verbose ones and void kind of made sense to me at the time because it's like, well, I don't know. I had loose associations with what void was. I kind of associated it with, for whatever reason, electricity or vacuum energy or something like that. And that's kind of how I saw spirit, in a sense, at the time, at least, or at least the concept of connectivity, since that's what it was supposed to be about. And I treated like space-time and void as their own continuums with their own sort of elements, and they all just kind of stacked on top of each other to make the universe in that sense.
Cool. Yeah, again, I appreciate that it's an idea from a past self that maybe not. I don't know. It sounds like that might take a bit of thinking to come up with what language might really land for you today. But I'm curious if there's any first thoughts on that.
What do you mean by that? What language would fit?
Well, because
What would you call void today?
What would you call void today?
Void today is just bond in general.
Mm-hmm. There's like a relationship element there.
Exactly.
It kind of reminds me of Whitehead's process ontology.
Yeah.
Is that something you've been interested in?
Yeah, definitely. I think I recall looking into Whitehead in that era of time when I was developing these concepts, and at first I didn't really grasp what he was talking about, but now I fully do. It made increasingly more sense as I developed my own thing. It's like, yeah, processes and everything being made up of events in a sense. Yeah, it all made sense, or it all makes sense now. Yeah.
Cool. That sounds clear.
I'm curious. I have a couple of other words that your bond category brings to my mind. I'm curious how they land with you. So the first one is context, and the second one is complement, as in complementary.
Context. I kind of associate context with overarching environment. And that's also what I kind of see bond as. It's a space that one inhabits, the thing that contextualizes, or other context. The individual is primarily contextualized by whatever is around them. And complement, I have used that word before, but it's not necessarily in my typology. It's I forgot the exact context, funnily enough, of what I used it in. It may have been in context to context itself, but yeah, I think I recall it now. It was that things aren't necessarily opposite; things are primarily complementary. Opposites are ultimately very they negate each other. They don't really if something is an opposite, they cannot coexist, while most things are just simply complementary. Yeah.
So we had James on recently, and his paradoxism would try and frame that as slightly different, I think. Paradox.
True. Very true.
Yeah, I guess when I think of context, I think of like foreground and background, or black and white. Things that rely on one another for definition. So that like relative to one thing, you have to have the other, or the first thing just doesn't, in that sense, make sense. I see that as being, I guess, akin to your notion of bond, connection, like relation. And context is a relative notion.
Nice one, Matt.
With respect to the process philosophy stuff, I actually had a question about the assumption part of the video. So one of the things that you say in the video is, well, what if all processes were the result of assumption, right? And I guess what immediately comes to my mind when I hear that is, well, what is the process of assumption the result of?
I think at the time I would have said process of assumption is its own sort of end. I kind of forgot the question. Did you say what it developed from, or what it's leading into?
What did it develop from?
Right. I think that is another. Yeah, I think that's an implicit sort of thing that happens in a continuum or a substance. That's what I probably would have said. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's like a assumption is something of a function that a continuum or a substance just sort of does. Beyond that, there's not much more I could say. Yeah.
Are you calling it assumption for a specific reason as opposed to kind of like a law or a process?
Primarily because of the multifaceted use of the word assumption. That's usually how I pick out my words. How many meanings does it have, and does it fit the image that I'm trying to convey? Yep.
Cool.
I mean, the sense I got from the video is that for you, assumption is like the primary or the fundamental process. Because you kind of talk a little bit about things are what they do, and then, but you kind of talk about, like I said, well, what if all processes were the result of assumption? Which would make, I would think that would make, because if the question, well, what is the process of assumption the result of? And then you say that's just kind of what things do. Then that would seem like the process of assumption is like the fundamental process, like the ground process.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And what does that mean? Because obviously assumption in the usual sense of the word is something that conscious beings do, like we take things for granted. And I guess on an ontological or metaphysical level, what does assumption look like?
Taking things in and gathering them up. That's what it looks like to me. Yeah.
It's very Whiteheadian. Prehension of sorts.
It does bring that to mind. I guess I'm a little... I don't quite know what you mean, though, because I guess my thought is that there aren't any things to take in or gather up until assumption has sort of... Assumption is, I guess, where you get the things that hypothetically would be gathered in or taken up, right? That's like, I guess, what I think of as being part of what assigning in that position of ontological or metaphysical basis gives us. So in the absence of the things that are consequent to the process, I guess I'm asking about the fundamental nature of assumption, not so much what does assumption look like once it's got going. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay. So I think I can only describe this in terms of purposes, because I recalled why I went with assumption in the first place. It's because I was trying to understand why there are things at all and how they could be the case, and I considered assumption as because it's like you can't really have any sort of idea without first making assumptions. So what if that extended across into objects too? What if they also needed to be assumed first before they could actually be in the first place? It's like how that it would be kind of how nothing becomes something in that sense. That would be the process in which that happens, and there's not much to really do until that happens. And before there is assumption, there could only ever really be nothing at all. So, or at least that's what I'm thinking it was at the moment. And then you have the consequent thing of assumption in which, material things are interacting via some secondary process of assumption where things are brought together in that sense. But yeah, ultimately, I think the primary purpose of why assumption is just there needs to be some sort of is, and that I think that is it. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me. It sounds like that when things are assumed, they're kind of in a potential state as opposed to a manifest state in some sense.
Yeah, it's potential becoming actual in that sense. Yeah.
Mm.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is that there's some kind of self-causative nature to the process of assumption, so that like nothingness just does generate something by. I guess I'm having a little difficulty with exactly how that works, but it kind of makes sense. But I'm just kind of a bit fuzzy on the details, I think.
Yeah, I am. Like nowadays, I don't really mess around with nothing. The concept of nothing to me is now just smooth continuum that sharpens, as it were, and that's how you get things. But beyond that, it's like, yeah, it's something that can't really be spoken of in a Wittgensteinian sense,
Sure. Okay. It's a very fascinating system you've got, and you should be proud, because it is very well thought out, and you're very articulate, very intellectually transparent and honest. I really appreciate your work. I think it's great. You should definitely be happy with what you've done.
I am nowadays I'm just like, it's definitely a creation of mine. I guess I can only be proud if it is genuinely actually finished, and I don't think that day will ever truly.
Maybe,
I don't know.
You're not actively working on it anymore?
I mean, I'm still technically working on it, I suppose. I mean, prior to like when you asked me to be here, I was like, well, I guess I should try and dust off the old ideas here and see if there's anything to talk about. Because I definitely kind of fell out of the habit of talking about any of my philosophy and thoughts in general. So yeah, after pulling out the ideas again, it's like, you know what, I can probably write another book on this because of how different it is now. But
Yeah.
it's
or another video maybe, or I'd love
yeah,
to.
it could definitely be another video series, because I have a couple of I guess cinematic happenings in my head as to how I could portray the ideas. Yeah.
Speaking of which, your videos are very well made, like polished, professional. Really, just bravo.
Thanks. Yeah. It's I don't have much to say. I'm an obsessive person.
No,
Like
And an
I don't
artist as
publish
well.
anything until it's like at least 90% good in my
I
eyes.
feel like obsessive, I think, is downplaying it. You're clearly very talented as well. Talented, intelligent, switched on, and thorough as well. Very thorough. Obsessive is one way of talking about it. I think that's a little derogatory, to be honest.
I don't
I
know.
love it. If I were you, I would be very proud of myself. I'll just.
Well, I'm glad people like it. That's all I tend to really want.
Mm. Do you feel inspired after kind of diving back into it to make more, like videos or books, or write more?
Kind of. I mean, it comes in waves, right? I will go maybe a month or two without thinking or writing anything about it, and then I'll maybe like for 1 week or maybe a couple of days, I'll just be all in on it and just like updating
Yeah.
everything.
I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
I'm actually really curious. Not this is probably a bit presumptuous, not to self plug or anything, but I'd be really curious as to how your ideas would mesh with mine. I don't know if you saw, I posted in the TOE server a couple of months back my paper on datalogical metaphysical theory, and I'm feeling from our discussion that there's a lot of potential for chemical reaction, and alchemical reaction maybe, between our frameworks, and yeah, I would be really interested to hear like whether you thought that they were compatible, or even if they're not, maybe it could be spur for you to, I guess, distinguish your view from some of the suggestions that I might make about some of the things that you've said in terms of characterizing the metaphysical basis of your system.
Yeah, I must admit, well, firstly, I left the Theory of Everything server months ago. It may have been before you joined, but
Probably.
yeah, I did. I think I pinpointed who who was partnering with Alex here, and I was like, I think it has to be this guy shortly. And I did look at your videos before we hopped on call, and I was like, okay, I don't have time to look through all of this, but let me try and get a glimpse of what's going on here. It's like, okay, these are all very familiar concepts. I wonder if he's going to be in this call too, or who else is going to be joining. But
which videos were those?
I think it was it was like a 2-hour talk or a lecture. I forgot the exact name. Yeah, synchronicity.
Synchronicity. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I of course didn't have the time to look through all of it, but it's like I caught the intro. I was like, okay, I have a sense of what this is like. I of course I don't know if I didn't know I was going to be speaking to you at all. So I didn't digest it too much further than that. But
and actually, the videos, I don't have yet a video on DM theory. I really need to, especially.
Yeah, I was looking for DM theory. I was like, what is that? What is DM theory?
Yeah, I mean, once we get off the call, I'd be happy to send you, a version of the paper, and you can, because like I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and I think it could potentially be a very fertile ground for collaborative work, and not just that, but I think your typology system has, like I said, I'm not just trying to flatter you. I genuinely think it is brilliant. It is one of the best typologies I have ever seen. I was shocked when I watched the video in terms of the scope and comprehensiveness of your work. I'm impressed.
Well, I'm glad, because I go through ways of like, man, this is not going deep. This is not getting to the details that I want to get to. How can I get to those details? So yeah, I mean, I guess it'll continue developing, but I'm glad it's getting something. It's reaching someone at least.
Well, one of the things that I thought I'd ask you and maybe make a suggestion is: do you have a personality test so that people can be typed in your? I would love to know, like, to see like what percentage of each of the different traits I am, and where that focus. I would love to be able to test myself with your system. Really, I'd love it.
Yeah, I made a test. It's not available anymore, and I also have like one that's a very complex multi-branch test, or at least it's mapped out. It's like half done, and I just kind of left it there. But that's yeah. I mean, it's in the works, or at least it was last year, because I was planning on maybe marketing and that sort of thing. But
yeah, no, it needs to be back at this, man. I seriously think there's so much potential, especially like the typology aspect of it. I think is just, like, I know about all the major typologies. I'm quite interested in psychology, and yeah, there isn't, as far as I know, there isn't anything comparable in terms of comprehensiveness available.
Well, dang. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, given that I was dissatisfied with many of them, I guess it makes sense.
No, exactly. Yeah. And
if you
I
need
felt
a testimonial,
the same way. Sorry, what?
If you need a testimonial, and Sync's got you covered.
Seemingly.
We'll just cut this little clip out, and you're like, did I? Look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people have asked me to give them my rundown of their type and all of that, and I mean, I have plenty of testimonials about the system, because it's been developing for years, and I've been talking to people about it and using it with people, and I mean, they attest that it's good, it's very good, and that it's helped them and all of that. I don't know. I just feel like it's not good enough. I don't know.
I get that, and maybe it's not in a finished state, but still, I think having a
Yeah, even
test.
if it's not finished yet, it still seems very effective. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I'm a philosopher and a writer. That's what most of my work is writing. And so I have numerous half-finished articles. One of my articles is about psychological typologies, and I'd love to include your system in that if I was able to, I guess, get a more sophisticated understanding. I mean, when I was watching the video just before we got on the call, the Aforma video, it crossed my mind a couple of times, like, I need to watch this video like a half a dozen times so I can like really absorb some of these ideas, because this is just, it's just.
Yeah, I do get the itch to make updates to my system, and it happens on a almost bi-yearly basis. It might happen again next year. So
Oh, yeah.
who knows? Yeah, I'll likely formalize it a little bit better. I was planning on doing that last year, but I kind of forgot what happened. I got sucked into something else. But yep.
Yeah. I actually have a friend who is very much into the same kind of process, like a continual refinement process with focuses around processes, and it's Vivi, Alexander. You've met him, obviously, and I really think you guys would hit it off, and I think he would have some really fruitful suggestions or feedback on what you've got going. Not to mention, he would love it. Like, I know he would just love it. So I'd love to, set something up. Maybe in a future jazz session, we could invite him along and we could give it a go, because, I think, I don't know, like I've noticed throughout the talk, you kind of downplay it and you're like, yeah, that's one of the things of all time. I did that, and it's like, but like, I really feel like you're not giving yourself enough credit, man. That's one of the reasons I'm being so effulgent about it, is that, I feel like I've got to balance out your like apparent nonchalance, because like it really is an amazing piece of work.
I mean, I guess I'll have to take your word for it, man. I'll have to take your word for it. I mean, so many people say that, and yet it's like, well, I'm just kind of living it. And I guess to the artist, the artist making the thing, they don't really. It's like, yeah, whatever. I just kind of do the thing. It doesn't matter to me. But of course, other people find it amazing. But
Well, I don't know if this changes anything, but like, I'm extremely critically minded. I don't give this kind of praise pretty much ever.
Yeah.
Pretty much ever. It doesn't happen for me. So for me, it says something that, I'm so impressed by it, because usually my mind is very focused on the negatives. And in that respect, I think there's potential for a very fruitful discussion around some of the actual underpinnings of the system and the metaphysics and ontology and all of that. I think what we've touched on already in this talk tells me that there's a lot of potential there for, as I said, an alchemical reaction, if we can get into some of those details. And that's where I guess the criticality part of my mind has focused on. But when it comes to the actual typology, like, there's maybe I'll notice more flaws in it when I watch it again,
Yep,
but
sure.
like, on a first impression, like, it's great. It really is very impressive.
Great. Wonderful.
It feels like a really. Hold on and sing.
No, what were you going to say?
I was going to say it feels like kind of a natural wrapping up happening.
It does. But before we did that, I just wanted actually to ask a little bit about you, Branden. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I primarily make art for a living. I don't really do it in my spare time anymore. Well, I guess in my spare time, I do work on personal projects. I'm in the process of making a game. That's going to be quite the endeavor. That'll take a number of years, but as you can see, I can spend a long time on something, and it'll develop into something at least half decent. But it's that. Yep. So that's the extent of my work. Beyond that, I clearly have a great interest in psychology and science and many other fields. I try to weave in as much as I can into singular contexts. And beyond that, I don't think there's much more I can really say. Maybe I can. I don't know, but yeah, I guess that'll come through in future jazz sessions.
Well, just quickly before we end, if you had to pick 3 positive adjectives and 3 negative adjectives to describe yourself, what would those be?
Oh, man. Positive. I would go with determined and maybe I would maybe want a better word for this, but maybe detail orientated, even though sometimes I would say not so. I wouldn't put that as a negative category, but detail orientated and strangely optimistic. I think that is also a positive trait of mine.
Okay.
Yeah. And negative. I mean, I could just about everything that I say that is positive could also be said as a negative in my mind, but I'll say a few of these as negative. I can be very, very stringent when it comes to rules. So that's one. Stubborn. And kind of I tend to overlook maybe important details or yeah, no, I think that I think I would say that. Yes, I tend to overlook important details. Yes.
Can you elaborate on that last one a little bit?
It's like I may get obsessed in like the tiniest things in my own creations, but while I'm doing that, I'll completely ignore where my body is a lot of the time. So yeah, it's a low interoception sort of thing. I'll forget what my bodily needs are a lot of the time. That's also a bit of a negative.
So
I'm
you can
learning how to not
neglect.
do that.
So sometimes you neglect like practical considerations or something like.
Yeah, I think a better negative. I might swap that out for some other negative that I said. It's that I'm not a very I tend to not get along with.
Really?
Yeah, really. It's like I can be nice and friendly, but if that goes on for a little bit too long, I will get kind of mean.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like groups and communities. I tend to not like them very much for that particular reason, especially if they're trying to like include me in things I don't want to be included in. But I will not be very nice about it.
Well, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, I don't think I'll have to worry about it here, though. This isn't a very large group.
True.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, Branden.
Definitely. And I'm looking forward to doing it again because I definitely think we have more to talk about. And
yeah, there's plenty to explore.
that's it.